Hey everybody. Today we've got an episode that you absolutely need to see. Our guests are two remarkable individuals with deep expertise and first-hand experience. Commodore Perry is a retired Green Beret and Special Operations combat medic with 25 years of military service. And Michael Yon is an esteemed war correspondent and former Green Beret who has been reporting from some of the world's most difficult and dangerous conflict zones. Today's discussion centers on the escalating crisis at our southern border, a situation that has turned into a full-scale border war. Over the past few years, we've seen a surge in illegal immigration that's unlike anything we've ever witnessed before. Tens of thousands of people are pouring across the border each month, overwhelming our border patrol and creating an untenable situation for communities on both sides of the border. This crisis just isn't about numbers, it's about the humanitarian disaster unfolding with human trafficking.
I've got a medical background, and the 8-year-old little girl couldn't speak, she couldn't talk, she couldn't do anything at all. The little 8-year-old girl had 67 different DNA samples inside of her.
Drug smuggling. And the exploitation of vulnerable individuals by criminal organizations.
But you are really not smart enough to know who I am. But soon you're gonna know who I am. Very easy. The entitlement.
Michael Yon has been on the ground, particularly in the Darien Gap, a notorious stretch of jungle between Colombia and Panama that has become a major route for migrants making their way to the U.S. His reports have exposed the harrowing conditions faced by these immigrants, as well as dangerous networks facilitating their journey northward.
So do they come to you just right here at the border and you guide them across in some way?
Yeah, we pick them up over there at the city and then bring it over here.
How much money do you guys get?
Depends on people.
Depends on the person?
Yeah, for like 2,000 a week.
How many people do you guys cross a day usually?
Just depends. 10, 12.
10 or 12?
Here they come.
Here we go.
What's happening at our southern border isn't just a regional issue, it's a national security threat. And the implications for our country are profound. However, YouTube has decided to take down our full interview with Corey and Michael, citing medical misinformation, but don't worry, we've got you covered. The censored version of this discussion will still be available right here on YouTube, but for those of you who want to see the full uncensored conversation, head over to Rumble and X, where we can speak freely about the realities on the ground. We want to take a moment to thank our audience for your unwavering support. It's your commitment that enables us to bring these critical conversations to the forefront. If you value this content and want to support our mission, please consider checking out our Patreon right here. Your support helps us continue to provide unfiltered, in-depth coverage of the issues that matter most. Thank you, and don't forget to check out both the censored version here on YouTube and the full discussion on Rumble and X. Without further ado, Commodore Perry and Michael Yon.
Side by side, our hearts open by, and we'll never tire. We do not comply. We do not comply.
Corey and I have known each other for a couple of years now. We met through my buddy Andy Chomko, who's a retired Ranger.
His flag.
And
Right.
strangely enough, I've been following you for a couple of years on X. So when Corey brought up your name a couple months ago, I was like, whoa, the guy at the Darien Gap? And he's like, yeah, it's the same guy. And I was like, he's doing some of the best reporting on what's going on at the border than anyone I've ever seen. So that's how I got onto you. And then I started looking into your history, and I'm like, this guy's a badass. So
I'm just bringing some 10th group love to it.
So let me just do a quick thing for the people. And the other thing is like, I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, Joe Biden's hometown.
Oh Lord.
Yep. Hillary Clinton's dad is from there.
Right.
And it's a pretty interesting, strange town. And I hate to say it this way, but a lot of them are very uninformed about what goes on in the world and their community.
Yeah.
So what I thought we could talk about today is some of the stuff that goes on in the border and where this is leading. Because it doesn't seem like it's leading to a good place.
No, it's clearly leading to war.
Yeah.
Right?
So
it is war.
Let me just do it.
Right.
So for people who don't, where's my camera? Right there. So for people who don't know, Michael Yon is an American writer, photographer, former military veteran known for his work as a combat journalist. He served in the U.S. Army Special Forces Green Beret in the early 1980s before transitioning into journalism in the mid-1990s. So if we could start, what made you go from combat? The natural progression for you was journalism.
Well, actually, I've never been a journalist, and I'm not now either. But
all right, well,
there's like
I screwed up. Sorry.
That's all right. There's probably 5,000 articles that says I'm a journalist, but they're all wrong. But I did become a writer. I mean, I became an author and that sort of thing. I've written 6 books, and but I ended up in the wars. Well, I was in 10th Group. I was in the Army, and I went to 10th Special Forces Group, and loved that. I loved SF. The Army, I didn't care for them, but I loved the SF. And then, but after the Army, I went to school. I actually did security for Michael Jackson for a while I was in school, of all things. And then, I ended up starting a business in Poland and that sort of thing. When I was in 10th Group, actually, what we trained to do was actually parachute into Poland. I can talk about it now, obviously, but back then you couldn't talk about it. But what I trained to do for several years was to parachute into Poland with our 2 of the A teams I was on to fight Soviets. And so anyway, later after the Army, I ended up starting a business in Poland, and it was quite interesting. And then later, as time went on, I became a writer in the 90s. And so then we have the war, 9/11 happened. I was down in Florida at the time. At this point, I had already, kind of traveled extensively around the world, but I was still spending most of my time in the United States. And then 9/11 happened. I realized, wow, that was a phase change.
Yeah.
Of the United States. Everything's going to be different now forever, right? And then 2 of my friends, one that I was in 10th Group with, I didn't go to the war in the beginning. I mean, when the war started off, I actually went back. I went over to Asia, and I was all over India and Nepal and just all over Asia, right? And then one of my old teammates and one of my Green Beret teammates, Richard Ferguson, we were in 10th Group together. He was killed actually on March 30th in 2004 in Tikrit area, right? And up in that area. And he was on some kind of combat operation, and the vehicle rolled over. And then the next day, a friend of mine that I used to work out with in high school, Scott Helvenston, who was the youngest Navy SEAL in history, actually, we used to work out together in high school. He was killed. So one was killed one day, and one was killed the next day. Richard was killed, and then Scott was killed. And I went to both of their funerals. Richard and Fergie, we called him, in Colorado, and then Scott was buried in Florida. Scott was one of the Blackwater contractors who was, hanged off the bridge in Fallujah.
Oh my God.
And so, and as you know, he was the youngest Navy SEAL in history. And actually a lot of people, I say, he was actually 17 when he made it. And a lot of people are like, that's bullshit. Nobody ever made it, but he did actually. It only takes like a minute to research it. But I mean, he was a stud. He was a super stud. And back in high school, we played on the same football team. We worked out together, and then he went off to SEALs, and I went off to Green Berets, right? And so, so I went to their funerals, and at Fergie's funeral, the Green Berets there, I knew a bunch of them. They were like, "Why are you running around in India and stuff? You should be off in Iraq." And I'm like, "I'm not going to the wars. I mean, it's pretty dangerous." You know what I mean? And
sure.
And I mean, look, and then I went to the Scott's funeral down in Florida, where we both are from. And the SEALs there were saying the same thing. Why don't you go to Iraq or Afghanistan? I'm like, why? I mean, but then as that's 2004, and then as the year progressed, I could see that the war was getting more intense, and that and I didn't trust the government, and I certainly don't trust the media. And all my Green Beret friends were like, "Hey, you got to get over to the war. You got to go over," and so finally, Fallujah 2 started to kick off. Operation Phantom Fury in October 2004. And that was when I said, you know what? We're clearly losing the war. It's a clear insurgency. So that was when I decided to go. So I showed up in December of 2004, and another friend from high school, he was the provost marshal at 1st ID at that point, 1st Infantry Division, Rodney Morris. I said to Rodney, okay, I'm ready to come. And so he got me, okay to embed with the 1st Infantry Division. I flew over to Kuwait, flew up to Iraq, and immediately wanted to go into the units that were in the most combat. So I just started doing tremendous amounts of actual combat. And that was when I'd never done any war correspondent work at all. I'd never done any correspondent work. I was just a writer, right? And so, but once I got there, I just asked Rodney, I said, what unit is in the most combat that will let me go with them? And he said, oh, it's probably Colonel Petard, Dana Petard down in Bakuba. I said, is he your friend? He's like, yeah. And so anyway, next thing you know, I'm down in Bakuba and I started doing combat. And the next thing you know, I'm up, and I kept asking, okay, who, as that unit started to rip out, I said, let me go to another one. So I went out to Mosul, and that's when I got with the 1st Infantry Division. 124th Infantry Regiment, Deuce 4. And I spent 5 months with them. It became the most decorated battalion actually in the entire war. It took 183 casualties. Actually, the commander was Eric Carilla. He's now the CENTCOM commander. He got shot right in front of me. I mean, he's really super stud in combat. Yeah, he got shot several times right in front of me. And so he continued to fight and that sort of thing, broke his femur in half. He was on the ground, but he kept fighting actually. But I mean, now he's the CENTCOM commander. But anyway, so at that point, my first go in Iraq, I spent 8 straight months. And then I went over to Afghanistan, and then I came back to Iraq, and I started going back and forth, Iraq, Afghanistan. And, before you know it, the New York Times, called the Army and did some article about me. And the Army said I had spent more time embedded with combat forces than anybody else in the war. And that's when I was just getting limbered up, right? So by the time the wars were over, I spent 2 years in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and just huge amount of combat. I would just go, who's the next one? What unit? Marines in Anbar. I was out with the British in Basra. I was all over the Iraq war. I was all over the Afghan war. I went to Sangin, the British. I was with the British. They asked me to go out with them in Iraq, which I did quite a lot, more than once. And then once I went over to Afghanistan, there was one district there called Sangin. It was out of about 400 districts in Afghanistan. It was the most dangerous. Journalists didn't want to go out there because it was so dangerous. Everybody's getting smoked out there. And the British asked me if I would go. I was like, send a helicopter. So I went out there and went to Sangin. It was the most dangerous district out of 400, about 400, maybe 396 or something in Afghanistan. And I spent, and I kept doing it. And so that's what I did. Then I went to the fighting here in Thailand, where I'm at right now. There was actually tremendous fighting right out my window where I'm at right now. I was in 2 of the coups here in Thailand. I went down to Philippines. I was up with the Maoist in Nepal. I did a lot of war stuff, right? And so after I got started, then I did quite a lot. And so, at some point, I just became quite experienced at the combat side, and to the point where there's no war correspondent that can bullshit me. You know what I'm saying? And so, what I learned was there are war correspondents, and then there's combat correspondents. There's relatively few war correspondents compared to normal, say, journalists or correspondents. There are relatively very few. But compared to combat correspondents, real combat correspondents who really do a lot of combat, you will be lucky if you ever meet one. If you meet 2 together at the same time, that's going to be like meeting 2 unicorns. There just aren't very many no shit combat correspondents. And I mean, that really do there's a lot of war correspondents, and then you'll see people that go out and they get into a bunch of shootouts and they make a documentary or whatever, or they spend years in wars and whatnot. But they generally go out, they get into some shootouts, they get the audio, they get the video, and that'll be enough of that. I was just like, send me to the combat, sir. Put me in, coach. You know what I mean? And so, I got to the point where generals couldn't bullshit me. Nobody could bullshit me about what was going on in the wars. So my predictions on Iraq and Afghanistan were quite accurate and increasingly accurate as time went on, because I was out where the iron crosses grow, let's say. And likewise here in Thailand and the 2 coups I was in, or Hong Kong when they kicked me out. So I got pretty good. That background in SF was extremely helpful. It became more helpful as time went on, actually, right? And so, and then I just did, a lot of war. And now, when I go down to Darien Gap, the SF guys know what I'm doing, actually. They can sense it. I'm force multiplying. When I go to Darien Gap, I've taken probably 50 or 60 people down there. I've taken 2 congressmen, all kinds of journalists. I've taken Epoch Times, Ann Vandersteel, Masako Ganaha, just so many, right?
Yeah.
Laura Loomer.
You should
and I've taken and I've brought millions of eyeballs to the Darien Gap doing SF 101, force multiplication, right? So when I go to the southern border, Ann Vandersteel and we started Operation Burning Edge, where we just took a huge amount of journalists down there and just got a bunch of eyeballs on it, right? And I do this all over the place. I do it in Japan. I do it when I go back to Darien Gap. It won't just be me out in the jungle with Ann Vandersteel and Masako. We'll bring journalists in. So a lot of times you'll see things in the news and you won't realize that our operation is behind it, because I'm just force multiplying, right? If you want to play serious, you got to do what Jesus did. He was an A-team leader, right?
Right.
You got to throw some mustard seed on the ground. You got to throw some mustard seed down there. And that's what I do. I force multiply. The SF people can see it. But most people don't get it. They don't get it at all.
I was going to ask, it's you're in the unique position staying in theaters of war, right? If you did 2 in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan versus active duty SF, right? So we go in for 6 or 7 months, then we rotate out, come back, then we end up doing like a J set to Africa, go to Niger, and then we do some individual schools, and then maybe there's a year in between our combat deployments, and we go back for another 6, 7 months, right? So, and things change a little bit, but in your experiences, being immersed in it for so much time, you get to intimately know what's going on, right, in that theater. Does that give you? That obviously has to give you a better perspective. Like when you say, bullshit.
That's what I was going to ask.
that you were there.
Yeah.
You've seen what's actually going down, what's going on, operations. The enemy and friendly, and what's being reported on the mainstream media. So I don't know if that was just like initially kind of like an eye opener, or you kind of knew it before that, or was it a process over years to get your understanding of how governments work? What wars are for, and how the world works?
Oh, I definitely got better over time. When I first went there, luckily I had been in the Army before, and a lot of my friends and family either were or are even still now in the military, right? As you know how we are. We got all kinds of friends and family. From the beginning until now, right? And in the future, I'm sure as well. So I had some understanding. Like, for instance, most of the journalists who want to go over there, they want to immediately go talk with generals. Whereas I was talking with NCOs a lot, and I would want to talk more like with captains and lieutenants and majors and battalion commanders. I didn't usually peak above battalion commanders, right? And I found in the Iraq War, one of the sweet spots in the Iraq War was were like sergeant majors and battalion commanders. But in the Afghan war, I realized it was a little bit lower. Mostly I wanted to talk with like company commanders, A-team leaders, and a little bit lower actually, because they were different types of wars, right? Like I'm looking for the sweet spots where I get the maximum amount of information for my time. And so I started to realize some of the key people to talk. SF is obviously key because they move around battle spaces, right? And so I would move around battle spaces, which gives you a huge advantage, right? And so also I learned that talking with the priest and that sort of thing, the chaplains knew a lot. because everybody talks with chaplains, right? So I learned that over time. It's like go straight to the chaplains. Chaplains always know about morale, actually. And also the medical people, they know a lot, right? So talk with medical people, talk with chaplains, talk with special operations guys, talk with combat camera actually was very good, because a lot of people, I only found that by accident, but combat camera, they roam all over the place. So, you know, most, like if you're on an A team, you might be in one battle space, or maybe depending on what your job is, you might be roaming around, or you might be in one place mentoring some IPs or something like that, right? But combat camera, they will be going they might shoot over to Afghanistan, they might be down in the Philippines, then they might be in Iraq, down in Basra and Mosul and out in Anbar. So they start to get a feel for different places. So actually combat camera was key. Combat camera, chaplains, special operations types. And again, over in Afghanistan, I like to talk to like captains and that level, and company commanders. And then I would talk with generals, you know, as well. But once you spend enough time on the ground with people, then you know what questions you should even be asking generals. But actually in Afghanistan, I spent 2 years there, but a year of that was unembedded, right? I was just out running around in like literally helmet, Kandahar, up in the north, Mazar-e Sharif, Nangarhar. I was out, so many Nimruz. I was in so many different places all over Afghanistan, unembedded for a year, right? It's funny because often I would run into patrols out there. They might be SF. I remember one time I came across some Marines, and every time I ran into somebody like SF, they'd be like, hey, there you are. I mean, we were told you were right around here somewhere, because you know they'll be tracking me, right? They'd be tracking my phone and stuff, because I give them my IMEI number, and I don't want to get bombed, right? And so I remember I came across these Marines one time. And they're like, wow, I mean, there you are. And then they immediately called me up and, you know, called up, hey, he's here, he's okay. And I'm like, yeah, guess what? And they're like, you know, they're always like, you're crazy. What are you doing out here alone? I said, listen, let me tell you what. Let me tell you how many times I've been shot at when I'm alone. 0. I've never been shot at when I'm alone. But when I'm with you, I mean, Mr. Bullet Magnet, you know what I mean? I mean, it's like the vehicles are on fire, you know what I mean? And tires are burning, you know what I mean? We got firefights and A-10s rolling in, you know, but I never got into a single firefight when I was alone. Well, here in Bangkok, I did quite a few, but not in Afghanistan.
The exception to the rule.
Oh, yeah. And this was no kidding dangerous, actually. And, I mean, there was quite a few people got killed here, and I was in both of the coups in 2010 and 14. What's that?
I said that was terrible.
It was quite dangerous here, but I mean, but it's interesting. So many things you learn about wars and conflict. For instance, let's say here in Thailand, I left Afghanistan, I came straight to Thailand, right into fighting. Right, that was 2010. And then I was here for the 2014 coup as well. But one of the things you see in here in Thailand was there would be a lot of fighting. I mean, deadly fighting and lots of casualties and injuries and fatalities. And then just like 2 streets away, people are eating on the streets like nothing's happening, man. I mean, like, you're like, I can't believe this. I mean, they're literally going kinetic 2 streets over, and they're sitting down here just ordering, you know, Tom Yum Goong. And yeah, I mean, I saw that over and over. It was like the norm. And likewise in Hong Kong, like I was there, the fighting wasn't deadly. There wasn't that many people killed, just a few, actually. There was a lot of injuries, but I was there for 7 months. And so until they sort of deported me from Hong Kong. But again, it was similar. There would be a lot of very serious street protests, literally thousands of Molotovs being thrown. I mean, thousands, man, like shooting stars. I got lots of video of things like that. And then like a street or 2 over, everybody's just going about their business, shopping, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just so weird. And then the next day after these big fights in the streets, it would be like the tide came in and washed it all away. And if you didn't know there was fighting there a day or two ago, and you didn't know that that's a grenade hole in the street, you know what I mean? Or not Hong Kong. There was no grenades went off in Hong Kong. There was a lot of grenades went off here, right? M79s and hand grenades and even RPGs at times, and a lot of small arms. But if you didn't know that's where the grenade went off a couple days ago, you would have no idea. You'd just be, oh, there's a hole in the road. Looks like there's frags coming. But what I'm getting to is it would just be like the tide would come and wash it away. It's just interesting how the city kind of instantly heals itself. It's weird.
Is that something that, like, because I always think to myself that, like, American civilians have no concept of what that is. So they don't, being that they don't have any concept of, like, ordering a Danish and 2 blocks away is madness and strife. It doesn't give them perspective. So because they don't have the perspective, they just assume these feelings and this is what we should do, as opposed to, like, the pragmatic, like, time out, what is going on in our country? Does that question make sense?
Yeah,
great question.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to expound on that. This is really interesting because I spend most of my life overseas, right? In about 100 countries. So I've got a good baseline of, different countries. And like in the United States, you'll hear sirens all the time, right? I mean, how many times a day do you hear sirens, whether it's police or fire or ambulance? Right. Over in Japan, I was just over in Okinawa. I was there for like 3 weeks. I only saw cops like twice. I was actually over there for more than a month in this last trip. But I was over in the first 3 weeks. I think I saw 1 cop car. You know what I mean? And I didn't hear. And every once in a while, I'd hear a siren. Like, I don't know, enough that it's so uncommon. That you're like, hey, there's a siren. Whereas in America, it can be every hour. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And loud sirens in America, and Thailand similar. Like I've been here for about a week this time, right? And I haven't heard 1 siren. And, it's just like, and anyway. And so, when there would be deaths in the streets, if this was the United States, this stuff would be locked down for blocks, man. It'd be crime tape everywhere. It'd be like, get away, get back, sir. Here it's totally different, right? It's totally, in most of the countries I go to, they're not as, let's say, ultra hyper vigilant to the point where it's insane. That's why I think the United States will be very easy to just super ultra lock down, because 1 IED goes off on a road, they're going to lock that thing down for 5 miles. It'll be, from this exit to that exit, everything will be locked down for a whole day or 2. You know what I'm saying? And you've been in war. You know how many IEDs there are out there. It's a lot, right? I mean, and whether it's real or hoax IEDs or whatever, or ambushes or whatever, if when that would happen in Thailand, the stuff would happen and the stuff would instantly open right back up, right? And similar in Nepal, instantly open right back up. I know what's going to happen in America. It'll just be locked down. It'll be, checkpoints everywhere, like you're in Baghdad or something. Of course, you remember how locked down Baghdad was, 1 checkpoint. And for those who haven't been in war, by the way, one of the most dangerous things you'll ever do is pass through checkpoints. I mean, that can be as dangerous as, straight up getting into ambushes. You'll see, because the time is coming when there's going to be checkpoints across America. I highly advise you to avoid as many of those as possible, especially at nighttime.
So I guess that like feeds into like what's going on at the southern border and who's coming across. And I think that that's something that like a lot of Americans don't truly understand. They think it's like, give me your tired, you're poor, yearning for freedom. Is that what's happening?
No, it's give me your gangsters, give me your jihadists. You know what I mean? This is straight up. I'm down in the Darien Gap all the time. It's an invasion. It's not migration. It's not a border crisis. There is no border and there's no crisis. It's a war. We're being invaded, right? These are invaders. Words are atomic structures of truth and lies. So we have to use the most accurate soldiers. know about that, right? So the soldiers don't need a briefing. But a lot of the journalists I talk with, they don't get it. They're like, no, we have to call them illegal immigrants or, because, well, it'll turn people off if we don't. I'm like, well, okay, so you're going to start by lying that it's illegal immigration, right? So,
right.
I mean, so in other words, nothing else you say can be trusted, right? Even my friends, some of them are journalists. They'll send me articles that they write, and they'll start talking about illegal immigrants. And I'm like, I'm not posting your link. It's that simple. If you can't even get those words right, I will not publish your links. I mean, because I can't trust anything else you say. Either
the basis of it is a lie.
If you're going to make water, we need 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, right? If we use lithium and sodium, it's not going to be water, right?
Right.
So we can't make a cake out of lithium and sodium. When it says add water, we can't substitute H2O, for something else,
right?
And so it's the same. If you're going to tell a story about what's happening, you have to use the accurate terms. And if you're not going to use what it really is, then you're just worthless. I mean, seriously, not only worthless, but part of the problem. In the Iraq War, I was the first one calling it civil war. I was calling it civil war since February maybe of 2005, and people are like, you can't call it a civil war. I'm like, it's a civil war. I mean, the Sunni and Shia are killing the shit out of each other, right?
Right.
And they're like, yeah, but it's politically inexpedient. Like the people, I don't care. And the bottom line is you have to call it what it is, because one component of the Iraq War was a civil war. There were other parts that were not civil war. There were parts that were insurgency. There were parts that were other things. There was criminality that was, huge amounts. But so there was multiple types of wars going on simultaneously and overlapping. Like, I didn't know if there was any civil war in Anbar province. That was just insurgency, right? And also the business. They wanted to do business, and we were interrupting their business, right? But down over in Bakuba and that in Diyala province, there was actually civil war going on. There was civil war in Baghdad. There was no civil war to my knowledge down in Basra. There was a little bit of civil war going up in Mosul and a lot of insurgency, right? So it was a mixture, right? And so, but if you're a doctor, if you're an oncologist and your job is to treat cancer, and I can't call it cancer because it's going to make everybody here upset. Well, then what good are you as a doctor? You got to diagnose what it really is so that people can, first of all, you have to have the skill to do it. And then secondly, so you have to know the difference between that's an insurgency and that's a civil war. Keep in mind, those things will go hand in hand. It's not like they're completely severable, but not to go into that. You guys get it. But the bottom line is if you're going to call it what it's not, well, I'm sorry, sir, you've got a terrible headache, but luckily you don't have cancer. Just go home. Meanwhile, you're like, well, I didn't want to tell him he has brain cancer, even though it could be treated. It's like and so that's the same with these types of wars. It's the same with the invasion. The people that are just calling it a border crisis, you're just a liar, or you're just such a poor analyst. Why would I read one more word that you say if you're calling it a border crisis? There's nothing else that in your article that I care to read because you can't even get that right, And there's a lot of other people that I know that are on the border, and if I got a limited amount of time, right? As we all do, right?
Right.
So everything's about priorities, and I got lots of sources, and some call things what they are. So I'm going to devote my time to those sources who have, first of all, the analytical skills to call it what it is, and the courage to call it what it is. So that's where I spend my time. And just, you can't back down from that. And if people don't publish it, have a nice day, right? That's fine.
So what was it? What were the things that you saw? And you can interrupt me whenever you want, bro. Yeah. So for like the suburban housewife that lives in northeastern Pennsylvania, what were the things, like, what groups did you see? What countries did you see? What sort of movements did you see? I think if I'm not mistaken, you were the one that I was watching that was talking about the Chinese are building like these strange immigrant bases down there where nationals are coming in, and they're preparing them to just go up into the United States.
It's not the Chinese that have built the bases. We paid for them. The United States.
Oh, even better.
There's one. Yeah, there's one camp called San Vicente Camp. That's what they call it in Panama. It's in Darien Province. It's on the edge of Darien Gap. I'm down there all the time. San Vicente. I've been in it many times. I would stay in a hotel right beside it many times for months. And it's a 1-star hotel. I call it a 5-star 1-star because it's a 1-star hotel. Like no hot water or anything like that, but it's clean.
Right.
But that I call that China camp because that's the camp that most of the Chinese use. But Iranians use it, Afghans use it, people from about 150 countries use it. But it's nicer than a couple of the other camps that are down there. So it's the one that the Chinese who have more money will tend to use, and they get on buses and then they head out of Darien Province after they make it through the Darien Gap. I'm sorry. Then they'll stay in these. They'll stay in. One's called Lajas Blancas camp, and then the other major one is San Vicente. And Mayorkas, Ali Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, has been down to San Vicente camp. China camp again is what I call it. And I was there. I was physically present when he came. That would have been 2022, right? I think April 17th, maybe, and something like that. And I was there, and I got. I mean, he promised to build up the infrastructure down there, and he did. And so now the flows even increased more, and it's just increasing, right? And now there's a lot of other flows that are going on, like a lot of the Cubans and Haitians who used to go through the Darien Gap, some still do, but a lot of those go straight to Nicaragua right now. So they skip Panama and they go to Nicaragua. Others are flying straight from Colombia straight to the United States. United States is actually doing it. So there's flights 24/7 that are bringing people all over the United States. They're bringing them up to Canada as well. Like I was just up in Canada recently. Canada's gone, man. Canada's gone with the wind. Mm-hmm. I mean, and like I was over in Toronto and Vancouver and up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories. Yellowknife is like overrun with like Nigerians and Somalis and Pakistanis, Afghans. It's gone.
What's one of the most oppressive security states, as far as a country is concerned, as far as like surveillance of their people, restricting movement, access, to the economy to control the people?
Israel. United Kingdom. United States. China, but actually, weirdly, China's definitely locked down. I've spent about a year in and around.
So that's my question: is if China has everybody under surveillance, right? You can't move without the Chinese.
Yeah, so do we, and so does the United States.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. But we allow our citizens travel, right? For the most part, right? So you can come and go as you want, as long as there's no restrictions in that country. But my comment goes back to what you were saying about the Chinese movement through the Darien Gap. Plus, they have all this money. Doesn't China control the outflow and keep tabs on their citizens? I mean, how do they allow all these Chinese to come up to the Darien Gap?
I ask many of them that question, and they'll say, "Oh, I went on vacation here, there, whatever," and they end up coming through the Darien Gap. They'll fly down to Ecuador. They fly to Quito. And then they fly to, the capital of Ecuador is Quito. Then they'll take a bus up to Colombia. And some go to Chiang Mai, Thailand, I'm in Bangkok. Chiang Mai is, 300 or 400 miles north of here. And they'll land, because Chiang Mai I used to have an office up there, actually. Chiang Mai is the number one, or I don't know if that's changed, but as of a few years ago, it was the number one destination for Chinese leaving China to go on vacation. They would go in Chiang Mai, then they would start there, and then they start seeing Thailand and that sort of thing. But China, but a lot of the Chinese will actually go to Chiang Mai, and then they work their way that way. Interestingly, this book I've got here, Camp of the Saints. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's actually a fiction book, but it's actually pretty accurate. But on the preface here, they talk about how Chinese in 1993, in a nonfiction part of it, in the preface, this is a re-edition. They were paying, the Chinese coming into New York were paying like $20,000 to $30,000 in 1993 to get into New York. but they're paying the same amount now. They're paying 20 to 40, about 20, usually 20 to 30, but some have told me 40. Afghans too. Like I see a lot of Afghans coming through, and Afghans will usually say about 20 to 30 as well. $1,000. So this idea that all the Afghans are like starving to death, not true. You know, of course, we left tens of billions of dollars worth of gear over there. It's not too hard to score some of that and sell it somewhere.
Let me ask an incredibly stupid financial question, right? So if you're air quote fleeing from a country from oppression, right, or authoritarianism or subjugation, the way I would understand it is you don't have a lot of economic resources as an individual. So when you start talking about like 30, 40K, like how do they afford it? Is someone paying for it? And how do they pay it back?
And then on top of that, if they have that much resources and money, why would they risk their life through the Darien Gap?
Good questions. I mean, I've asked all those questions, as you can imagine, many, many times. You know, there's different people that get in there different ways. A lot of them have their own money, right? Most of the Chinese say they pay for their own way. There are some Chinese who come over as indentured servants. That's like a firmware part of their culture. Actually, a lot of Indians will do that as well.
Okay.
So they'll come over kind of as an indentured servant. And so like a lot of the Chinese go up and work on marijuana farms in places like Maine and Oklahoma and Oregon, California, that sort of thing. And then others go work like restaurants or that sort of thing. But there's others that are, I mean, you see them, you're like, this guy is like, some of them, they look like military officers or intelligence officers to me, like MSS people or something. You know, MSS is like their CIA, Ministry of State Security. Some of them seem like, you know, very serious military or intelligence types. But others, you know, it's clear that they're not like farmers. It's clear that, you know, just the way they behave, the way that they, you know, and Chinese, when they come through the Darien Gap, they'll tend to be quite clean, actually, because what they'll do is they pay an extra amount to go a more expensive route. They land in Quito, Ecuador. They get on that bus. They go up to Colombia. They go to a place called Nicocli, Colombia, which I've done. And they get on from Nicocli. I've done that part. Then they get on a boat and they go to a place called Cartagena, Colombia. And then I've done that part. And then they'll pay more and they'll take a boat around most of the gap. And then they'll go with these Indians called the Kuna Indians. I've been out with the Kuna quite a lot. And the Kuna will guide them through the jungle in a very safe route. I've never heard of any Chinese dying on that route or getting raped or anything on that route because it's a big money route, right? It's the premium route. And they'll have people carrying their bags and stuff. And some parts of that trip, they'll actually use horses on some parts of that, on that particular route. And then they'll come out and they'll end up in San Vicente camp, you know, China camp. And, but when they come out, they will have clothes that they've kept in plastic bags and they throw those other clothes away in the jungle. So they come out clean. They're not scratched up. You know, you're soldiers. You know how it gets when you get out in the jungle or the woods all the time. You're all scratched up and stuff. Most people are coming out like that, scratched up and kind of messed up a little bit. Not the Chinese. And not anybody that's taken that easy route. A lot of the Iranians take that easy route as well. A lot of the Afghans take the easy route. Chinese, Afghans, a lot of the Iranians. Who else takes that route? But those several groups do it every day.
You can go.
No, I was just going to say, you know, like with so many nationalities, right? People flying from all over, millions coming up to the United States through Panama. You know, it's almost like there's some cooperation there, right? So like what I think of is like during COVID, right? The whole world locked down together, right? All the governments kind of were in
like in a few days, they were all like, we agree.
Yeah, it's a, you know, pandemic. Let's shut down, you know, certain businesses. Can't leave your home. You know, tracking, tracing, like all this stuff like around the globe happened at one time in coordination. Like there's some authority over all nations that give the marching orders, and all these nations be like, Roger that, let's do this. So like I think of the same thing with this mass invasion, that all these other nations are in collaboration to allow this to happen, or at least allow the funding or monies to go down through NGOs, third parties to facilitate this. I mean, logistically, what's the cost and the logistics of 30 million invaders? I mean, it's massive. It's got to be massive. So, I mean, what's the likelihood that, same thing like COVID, all these nations got together and say, okay, we're going to allow this to happen, the invasion to happen from the southern border, and because nothing gets in the way, nothing stops it.
Yeah, I mean, the UN, IOM, United Nations International Organization for Migration, that's the main engine of this. Down in Panama, there's about more than 60 NGOs, IGOs, and nonprofits down there, right? So there's more than 60, and they're in more than 60. I think it's 63 when we last counted. And I think it's I think we found 63, and that their headquarters are in Ciudad de Sabana, the city of knowledge in Panama City, right beside the canal. It's old Fort Clayton. So for those veterans who are at Fort Clayton, it's the old Fort Clayton, right? And so that's Panama. Now there's an article today. I published it on my Twitter or X Space or whatever about how the Afghans are in Philippines, right? And the Afghans are in Philippines getting ready to go to the United States. And people are rightfully asking, why are Afghans in the Philippines getting ready to go to the United States? It's because the IOM, the theater headquarters for IOM, International Organization for Migration, again, that's the engine room. That's the ones who are divvying out most of the money to the NGOs and IGOs and all that, is IOM. Their main engine room for our theater of operations is in Panama. Right. So that's like that theater of operations. This part of the world, the theater of operations headquarters for IOM is in Philippines. That's why the Afghans are going to Philippines, because that's where the IOM HQ is here in Asia. Right. But, they've got a small IOM office here in Bangkok now. And if IOM opens anything in your country, you're scheduled for invasion. I went down to Belize earlier this year. They got a huge office there now. Now, Belize only gets a small number that come through at this point. I started telling people, I'm like, there it is, right there. They got a big office. They got a bunch of SUVs parked out there. I went there several times, 3 or 4 times I went there. And why do they have that big office in Belize City, right? And then you go to Belmopan, the capital of Belize, right next to the U.S. Embassy. Just across the street is the UNHCR headquarters there, right? And this is in many countries. The UN will have headquarters, UNHCR or others will have headquarters right across the street or like 1 block away from the U.S. Embassy, right? So that's your engine is the UN. These globalists this is unbelievable. I mean, this is meta countries, like the UN is almost like a country without a country. And they are the main engine. The United States government is fully behind this. I mean, yesterday we did our government did a repatriation of aliens, invaders who came through the Darien, and they sent them back to Colombia. I had somebody at the airport who got the tail number off the aircraft. We tracked it on flight radar, and it went because it was in, the United States announced we're going to start doing repatriation. So somebody sent me the tail number. We tracked it, and they just flew to Medellin. So we know that they did leave Panama City and go to Medellin. However, they also fly them out of Medellin straight to the United States. So they could have been flying them down to Medellin and then straight back up to the United States. I don't know, but it's all for show. I mean, the bottom line is the Darien Gap remains open. Now, the new president of Panama, Molino, he wants to close it. He wants to close it largely because of the work that our team, Operation Burning Edge, has done, and because we made it a big issue in Panama. But, I mean, you don't see this because it's in Spanish and it's in Panama, but that's what our team, Operation Burning Edge, has been doing. Force multiplying, getting it in the Spanish media and the Panamanian media and Spanish language and whatnot. So it became an election issue. So he came in on that platform to close it. Immediately, the United States and the United Nations are like, no, we don't want it closed. So they're having a tussling match right now. And that's why that repatriation, quote unquote, flight they just started yesterday from Panama City. But I know how this really goes. They'll fly them out and then they'll just fly them back up to the United States.
So there's that saying that when men are fleeing war, they bring their families. When they're going to war, they leave their families behind. How accurate is that from what you've witnessed, experienced, and people you've talked to?
The vast majority are military-age males, period. I mean, by far. Now, when you get the clown act, the corporate disinformation operations like CNN and Fox and all those clowns, they go down to the Texas border or whatever. They'll put the cameras on the women and children, and they do coming across there. But the ones who come through the Darien, and there are women and children who come through Darien Gap. There's no question about it, because I'm down there all the time. But the vast majority are military-age males. Likewise, over in Ireland, for instance, I get daily updates from Ireland. I went there a couple of years ago.
They're going through something crazy over there right now.
Oh, they're getting prepared to get genocided, I think, in my estimation. I went to Ireland a couple of years ago because I thought, hey, this is going to go badly in Ireland. And now, I was just on with Jim Ferguson. He's a very well-known Scottish sort of journalist. He's very popular over in Europe. And I was just on with him like a couple hours ago. And Jim said now he believes that it's about 2 million invaders in Ireland versus about 3 million Irish. So that's a 2 to 3 ratio there, right?
Yeah, that's like 60-40.
And so, that's 2 million versus 3 million.
Holy
keep
shit.
in mind, most of those, if that number's accurate, and I did go there and look a couple of years ago, I can't audit that because there's no way I have to audit it, but it does pass the sniff test. In other words, if you go there, you're going to be like, that number could easily be accurate, actually. And what's interesting is those are mostly by far like a far higher ratio of military age males in Ireland. And keep in mind, so if it's a ratio of 2 to 3, like 2 million to 5 to 3 million, then the 3 million Irish, that includes elderly people, women, children, men who would be unable to fight. And I think that my guess is that the invaders already have the Irish outnumbered. Testosterone to testosterone, I'd say they're probably outnumbered at this point. And keeping in mind, the invaders are facilitated. They are the ones that the Guardia, the police and the UN and everybody are supporting. Any Irish, there was 2 fires in about the last 24 hours. I don't know what caused them. They could have been, somebody was cooking in their room, as a lot of these aliens do, and set their place on fire, or it could have been arson. I have no idea. But there were 2 fires at these potential alien centers. But the bottom line is at this point, Ireland conditions are set to go ahead and genocide Ireland if they want to do that, which means run them out, and keep in mind, the Irish, they are actually indigenous people. They are straight up indigenous people, as much as the Navajo Indians, right? I mean, so these people from all over Africa and Asia come over, and the Irish are called racist. What? I mean, they are the actual indigenous people. And so there you go. But they're about to be genocided. That's clear.
I was talking to Mark
They'll
this
either
morning.
be run off. They'll either be run off or killed, or enslaved,
or used as kind of a front, because we were talking about in current times, any peaceful protest is gets hijacked. He just did a podcast with what was his name?
Oh, Michael Perillo, the American Muslim, the white American Muslim, or
no, the one you sent me a J6er.
Oh, Frank Scavo.
Yeah. So as you look at like January 6th, right? How many people are actually patriots? They're in peaceful protest, and then the movement gets hijacked, right? So if you look at like you're talking, it wouldn't take much in Ireland if you have a 2 to 3 ratio, is then you subvert the whole thing to make it look like, like something that it's actually not, but it's orchestrated, at a much higher level.
Yeah, and 4 years ago, me would have thought that this is insane, but then, I don't know, I started reading, and if you look at history, this is the blueprint. So it's not like this isn't crazy talk. Like it's happened before, it'll happen again. And these people have no idea what's coming.
Weapons of mass migration. There's books about it. You know what I mean? There's books about it. I mean, it's like This is an old war tactic. It goes back since before our great-grandparents' great-grandparents were born. It goes back many, many centuries.
So you were talking before, right? War, famine, and human osmotic pressure, right? They always go together.
Yeah, pandemic, famine, and war go together. I mean, that's triangle of death, right? And for, and of course, in the Bible, it's the four horsemen, right? And pandemic, famine, and war, and death or despotism, right? And so that's what we're facing. Of course, the pandemics have been, obviously, the pandemic is the jab itself. And who knows what's happening now with this monkey thing. I'm not even paying attention. Let's just get past all the R0 and all that crazy stuff and get right to the point where we're not going to take the jab. You know what I mean? Like, this is the thing when you're doing serious information war, the people who are resilient like we are now against it, those of us who are resilient against the information war now are 10 times more resilient than we were 4 years ago, right?
Yes.
We're not even entertaining the idea, right? There's other people that are just going to line up and get their shots and die, And so when you have information campaigns like this, historically, people like us, ultimately, they have to kill us, right? And so because we just become more and more resilient to it, so we're the ones that they'll send to the death camps or just kill us in the streets in some way or fashion. That's how this goes.
So what if we're in Vegas and we're putting bets on your assessment? What would you give the odds, and then what does that look like?
Odds of what?
Of that is what's going to happen in America, or is it already happening?
It's happening. I mean, seriously, they've already jabbed. How many people do you know that were like big jab pushers who are already dead?
Yeah,
it's I mean,
it's a lot. It's a lot, and I mean, it's like every day some other big. I keep telling these jab pushers like that drug addict guy Scott Adams, who's always the guy, the cartoon guy. He was a big jab pusher until he realized, hey, this isn't working out so well, and then he became, well, he's still that arrogant. The
Dilbert guy, right? It's the cartoon guy.
Yeah, the Dilbert guy. Yeah, and I keep telling these jab pushers, like Peter Zahan, let's say the so-called geopolitical strategist, or he's a clown, right? I read his book people kept asking me about Peter Zahan's book on geopolitics and all this, and I read it and I was like, it's ridiculous. The guy doesn't travel much, that's for sure, but he is very busy being gay and doing his jabs all the time. You know what I mean? He's just one of the wokesters, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm getting to is he's a big jab pusher. He was literally doing a video sniffling and coughing and sneezing and talking about, I think, 5 different jabs he had done. You know what I mean? You can't even make up this stuff.
No, it's madness.
And I just keep saying that if you're a big jab pusher and you think you're pleasing your masters by pushing the jab, but they didn't tell you, because you think you're in their club, but they didn't tell you not to take it. Guess what? There's no seat on the ark for you. Mm-hmm. They didn't plan for you to make it. If they didn't say, hey, Peter, push it for us, we'll pay you a bunch of money. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know why he was doing it, but they push it, but then they still take it. Then, hey, they targeted you too. You're just a useful idiot. Just like these aliens who are being pushed in. The invaders are being pushed in. They're useful idiots. The globalists have no use for them. Trudeau, who thinks he's the prime minister of Canada, he's just a condom for the globalists. They'll dispose of him when they're done with him, right? And the same with Harris, the same with Biden, and the same with Trump, right? Trump still sticks with that jab, right? And it's the same with and it drives the Trump people crazy when I say that, and they'll go, well, who do you want, Biden or Harris? Obviously not, but the bottom line is they're all part of that same architecture. It's the same thing. RFK, he's part of it too. They're all part of the same architecture. And we get that, people who've been in the military realize one of the things you're taught about military leadership is you'll get the behavior that you accept. If you accept low standards, you will get low standards. If you want high standards, you must demand high standards. Like in special operations forces, high standards are demanded, so you get high standards. But the average American will accept basically bullshit for a congressman or a senator. They'll accept a dog, for a president. They'll accept Biden, who can't, stand up as a president. And that's what's called a dog king, actually. And they'll accept the actual dog king. And so that's what they'll get. That's what they'll serve you. If you'll pay $100 for a greasy cheeseburger, you'll get a greasy cheeseburger for $100. And so that's what we continuously get. We get nothing. And so people ask me, well, what's your solution? I've given my solution. My solution is don't support any of those. Don't give a dime to any of them. Don't support that, because once we get into it, your house is burned down. I can't put your ashes. I'm not God. Only God could put your house together from ashes again. Once your house is burned, I told you, don't play with gas and matches in your own fire. That's what we've got now. We've got jab pushers. We've got, the border. Trump's already signaling that he's going to let huge amounts of these people stay in America. He's very clear about it. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't hide that he's a gun grabber. He doesn't hide it at all. And people say, oh, no, Trump's not a gun grabber. I'm like, ceasefire, Rambo. He clearly is, right? It's like ceasefire. He obviously is, right? He's one of them. He is clearly one of them, just like Governor Abbott. And we get this because Americans accept low standards. You accept low standards, that's what you're going to get.
Well, just like Yuri Bezmenov, right? The KGB defector, the ideological and cultural subversion, which takes decades. So first, where are you there is the demoralization of the nation, right? I mean, you can see it everywhere with pornography and child sex trafficking and LGBTQ plus movement, whatever alphabet, it's the demoralization of our culture. It's devaluing or sidelining the family unit, right? Christian values, everything's being destroyed, dismantled for that demoralization. Then you get into destabilization, which obviously we're in the process of. You got the economy, you got the invasion on the border. Our military is being dismantled, with the Marxist, the woke Marxist agenda, and plus the COVID shot that destroyed a lot of careers in the military and the DoD. So they're promoting people within the military that follow orders, even if they're illegal orders, right? So you got the military, we got the war on food, right? So you got, our foods are already packed with
crap, poison,
right? GMO genetically modified. You got because my wife's really into health, and a lot of stuff that's in the store, most of the stuff in the store, she won't even purchase because she'll be like, look, it's got this chemical, it's got this in there, and these food products are banned in most European countries because it's not healthy. You got the war on food. But anyway, so you got this whole destabilization from many facets. Next, he talks about crisis. Now, what could that be? There's a lot of things boiling around the world, right? You got the Middle East, you got in Ukraine, even in Asia, you got the looming threat of China invading Taiwan. I mean, it's all. I think the crisis is actually going to be many, 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 many things at the same time. It just crushes the United States. It's going to be the economy, the inflation, the dollar bottoming out, and then you got cyber, Klaus Schwab, the cyber pandemic, where banks go offline, you have no access to money. I think obviously we're probably on agreement, the U.S. dollar is not going to be around much longer, and then they're going to introduce the central bank digital currency, right? A huge control mechanism. But I think you got all these things coming together to convergence, right? So it's not going to just be one crisis. It's going to be multiple things that happens at the same time. And then, of course, the last phase is normalization, as Yuri Bezmenov would say. And that's when you have your...
You accept your coffee and fighting 2 streets away.
We'll have our enslavement. And anybody that resists that in the future it's like the narrative's building already. These Christian nationalists, which I guess I'm one, will become targets and rounded up and with no warrants, they'll just come to your door, say, hey, you've been, just like in the UK, posting online is now illegal. You can't post an opinion because it incites violence and you're a what do they call it, domestic terrorist threat or whatever the terminology is. So I think, what Americans don't see is, the frog in the pot of water that's the heat's slowly turning up. And it was, I always have this conversation, like, we're in a global war right now. It's just not kinetic here in the United States. So people don't, people that don't deploy to war and have seen the horrors of war, they can't wrap their mind around the horrors that go on. It's kind of like you were saying there's people eating at a restaurant 2 blocks down, there's people in gunfights. Well, same thing in the United States. You got longer geographical distances, but the United States, I'm sitting on a beach here by, beautiful ocean. We have air conditioning in our beach house, but Middle East and Gaza, people are being genocided. And you got the Ukrainian people pretty much fodder, cannon fodder for whatever agenda they want against Russia. But people just, that's why your message is so good, is because you are working hard every day to wake the American people up, to inform them, which is hard to do, right? When somebody's hypnotized or drugged up, like they can't see the truth even if you present the facts until it's on their doorstep. When it's on their doorstep, but then it's too late. But I think, what are your thoughts? Are we in, not necessarily kinetic, but are we in a global war right now? Undeclared.
Oh, look at the.
That's the thing that so I would just for perspective, I was a hardcore liberal until March of 2020. And then I was like, I live in Pennsylvania, and Richard Levine put all the COVID positive patients back in the nursing homes, and I thought that was a grenade that they were throwing in there, and that what made me go, my initials might be MD, but I'm not a doctor, and that sounds like the dumbest thing that you could do to keep people safe.
Yeah.
And that's when my spidey sense went up, and I was non-essential, and then don't let the guy who watched JFK when he was 13 non-essential, because I'm going to start looking and asking questions. And every person I talked to would shut me down. I know politicians, I know heads of hospitals, and they would tell me in private what's going on, but publicly it was a complete 180 from that. And you start getting accused of what are you watching, Fox News? And I'm like, nope, I'm talking to the source, because that's where it matters. Just like, not to compare myself to you, but you want to go talk to those people who are in the shit to understand what the concept of what you're going through is. So to his question, what do they call it? 5th generation warfare or something like that, where it's it's I try to tell people, I said 500 years in the past, we would look at all these people and say that they're under a spell, or there's been some magic used. And, the Mayans are sacrificing people to the sun god. Well, here we are today, not believing reality, and we're sterilizing and butchering children for the climate god. And you're like, 500 years from the future, we're going to look at this as the dark ages of medicine and humanity. We're not living in these amazingly, progressive times of intelligence and humanity. It's actually worse than it was 500 years ago.
And there's no political solution.
No.
Trump, Kamala, it doesn't matter. There's no political solution. And that's why I love, Scott Kesterson, his message. This is spiritual warfare.
Sure, good and evil.
This is spiritual warfare.
It is.
There's no politicking our way out of this, because it's all the evil that's behind the politics, right? How many politicians have material blackmail material over their heads? How many politicians have been on these Codell trips where they filmed them doing obscene things with minors, or the Epstein Island, right? So it's, I love Scott Kester's message about the spiritual warfare is we have to reverse the ideological and cultural subversion of our country. And the only way that do that is get back to our Christian founding principles, get back to a place of morality, putting God back into our communities, respecting the family unit, and only then, you're going to be able to reverse this.
And I don't think what you're saying is that everyone has to convert to Christianity. I think what you're saying is
the
that
country does. Not convert, but go back to its founding principles. The United States was great because it was founded on Christian principles. It was written into our documents, right, when our founding documents. And without that base,
the moral baseline.
The moral baseline.
Yeah.
I mean, you turned over to a reprobate mind.
Right.
It's just evil. There's no stopping it.
What?
I didn't realize evil was actually a real thing.
Neither did I.
Until recent years. I just thought evil was a behavior. Now I'm starting to think it's like a force of nature. I was over in Armenia about a year and a half ago, and I was asking some of the people there, I'm like, we were sitting at a table together, and I was like, what is evil? Like, if we're going to fight something, we need to define what that thing is so we can attack it. You know what I mean? And so we talked about it for quite a while. Chuck Colton said, what did he say? Evil moves towards death, basically good moves towards life.
Right. And
I mean, that sounded kind of simple and simplistic, but I think he's onto something there. But he said it more eloquently. I think he was right, though. Basically, evil just seeks death,
evil is
suicidal too.
Evil is what's it? Is it antithesis? Am I thinking? The opposite of God in the Bible, right? So anything, who was it? Oh, it was Candace Owens. She just posted a couple days ago. I saw a clip. That people only need to open their eyes and see the evil to believe that Jesus was real and existed and God is real, because everything that we see, all the evil in the world, is anti-Christ, anti-God, right? So if evil's got its target on everything Christ, then that validates in of itself, the annals of history and the Bible and the Word of God. To me, that makes sense, because I know.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the Bible is like a survival manual. I mean, it's almost everything I read. I read a lot. I read tons, right? I read a lot of old books, and every time I think I found something new, it's actually already written in the Bible somewhere. It's like a straight up Ranger survival manual or something. Because it's already laying out they already been through all, just even how people deal with money and stuff. It's all, everything that we think was new to us. There is nothing new under the sun. They already been through it all, man. Like pandemic, famine, and war. I thought I discovered that, hey, these things go together. And I said it on numerous interviews about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And finally, one of my longtime readers, she heard me on an interview. It was live. She said, you talk about pandemic, famine, war, pan for war. I started calling it pan for so people could remember. She goes, like you made it up. And I'm like, I did. She goes, no, it's in the Bible. It's the 4 horsemen. I'm like, oh, man, I plagiarized the Bible. Man, if you're going to plagiarize, go big.
Right.
but then I remembered, yeah, it actually, I mean, straight up, it's in the Bible. They knew these things because, when you get a big pandemic, you will get famine and war, and they do go together. They absolutely go together. With a small war, you might not get them, but if you get a big war, you're going to get pandemic and famine. Or if you get a big famine, if you get one, you get the other two. It's the 3 musketeers.
It's as a former, Democrat, it once you start seeing everything for what it is, it almost seems like there was a checklist where it's like we have to do certain things to make sure that whatever the ideology of us is ultimately the victor in this war against I didn't believe in human souls. I didn't believe in I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in any of that. And now I believe. I'm not necessarily a Christian or I grew up Roman Catholic, but I'm like, there is something out there that's divine that we can't understand in the metaphysical world. And I think that there's something to that. And it seems like the other side, it's like, we want to get rid of God. We want to close churches. So what do? We call these people we don't agree with white nationals, and they want to make sure that you're a Christian, and which ends up being like the Norman Rockefeller life or Norman Rockwell life, which is like, who kind of doesn't want that to some degree? Make sure that there's oppression, make sure that there's division, make sure that there's like everything negative that you could possibly think of. Meanwhile, the people are eating it up, going like, yeah, we want this. That's the thing that really fascinates me and terrifies me, is that, there's a whole group of people around the globe that have bought in to basically their own demise. And
straight up. Clearly doing things that lead to their own death and the deaths of their own countries, clearly. And it's like so nakedly obvious. Like, hey, let's invade New York with like millions of people that are from Somalia. It's like, okay, that's a great idea. It's like you're killing yourself, and yet they still do it, right? And it's just the brainwashing is intense, and the evilness.
So both of you guys, in your experience, like where does this go? There's an election in November, and you mentioned before the architecture, they're all part of the same architecture, no matter what selection they're giving you. Where does it go? Do we, the people, need to kind of open our eyes and realize there's a greater play at stake? Or, everybody just crosses their fingers that, in America, that after November 5th, some sort of normalcy will return depending on who wins or loses, or who they tell us won or lost.
I mean, if the heart of the nation...
There's no white knight coming to save us.
Nope.
We are the white knights. You are 911. It's time for men to do man stuff. You know what I mean? Everybody wants to be a hero until it's time to do hero stuff. It's that time, right? Our ancestors, the people who wrote the Constitution, and the people who, our original Congress, these people were brilliant. I read a lot of their old stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Just today I was reading. These people were classically educated. They were very smart. They knew how bad fiat currency was. They knew how Andrew Jackson was talking about how bad central banks would be. He was like, that whole time frame, not just the original founders, but in that whole time frame. I found these, I love to go to antique bookstores. And in Tokyo, I'm in Bangkok now, but in Tokyo, they got these incredible antique bookstores. And I went in there and I found these old books last month or so. Benjamin Franklin, 1806. He died in 1790. But these are his old papers and stuff from 1806. It's 3 books, right? And I bought them and I've been reading them. And it's amazing how incredibly smart that guy was. Benjamin Franklin, and just how, his grasp on history is just intense, right? And it's interesting because at one point he's like, he's giving advice to people. He's like, be like Jesus and be like Socrates. It's like, but interesting. He left this, and he did a lot of lessons for people to learn from. For instance, he bequeathed some money. I've forgotten how much it was. It may have been like $200. I can't remember. It was something like that. It was or maybe it was $650. I can't remember. But he left a certain amount of money, right? And they were not supposed to dispense that money for, I think, 200 years, right? And what he was trying to teach people was about compound interest. Uh-huh. So I think after the 200 years passed, it was dispensed to some city or whatever in Massachusetts, I think. And it was like $6.5 million or something like that. I'm sorry, you'd have to look it up. You know what I mean? But he just left behind like a little seed of a lesson, right? Just what I'm saying is these old timers, they had studied so many different things. They weren't distracted and they wrote better. It's one of the reasons I love reading old books, is because they wrote better and they had clearer thought processes, actually. If you haven't read much of Ben Franklin, I highly suggest. I mean, that guy will tune you up on like these are important things to study.
I'd love to see it.
It's 3 books. Yeah, it's 3 books, and it's oh man, it's got all these things. You know how the old books, they got maps that fold out and drawings and all this stuff. And there's so much higher quality. Like the books themselves are just, look, I found these other books and they were from 1856. They were from Commodore Perry is the one who opened up Japan, right? Commodore Matthew Perry, right? He's a naval officer. He was sent over by the U.S. government to open up Japan, right? So he went to Japan in 1853, and then he came back in 1854. And every Japanese knows this story. And so, and he opened up Japan, right, with literally gunboat diplomacy, and also he used, barrels of whiskey and stuff like that. But anyway, so I was in this antique bookstore, and there's these 4 books that are about this wide, or about that big. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, 3 books that are his after action report, basically his report to Congress, and then 1 book is maps, right? And I found these on this bookshelf, and I was like, oh, I can't believe it. This is first edition, 1856 of his report to Congress, and I pull them off the shelf in this antique bookstores. And they've got these fold-out maps that are super detailed of Okinawa and Honshu and all these different places. Color drawings of birds. This is original. This is 1850. Super beautiful, unbelievable snakes, birds, seashells,
plants,
everything, man. And it's like, so I bought those books, right? And I got back to my hotel because I was in that part of Tokyo just to go through bookstores for a week. And I messaged to people like Mike Flynn. I said, you're not going to believe what I found. I messaged to these admirals and stuff. And they're like, I hope you bought the books. I'm like, of course I bought them. They're sitting right beside me, man. You think I'm going to leave those books? I'd give my last penny for those books. I've been going through those books. But you should see what this guy did when he came to Japan, how smart he was. I mean, you look at how he's like, before he came to Japan, he read every book there was on Japan. He had them translated from Dutch. Yeah, it was straight up hardcore area study. He's like, I got all these books in Dutch. I got all these books in German. I got all these books. Had them all translated. Then he comes over and he's studying the emperor and all this stuff. And he's got a big list in there and all the gifts that he gave to the emperor's wife, like a barrel of whiskey, a pistol, and a bunch of ball ammunition, a real ball, like a barrel of gunpowder and a dress and all this different stuff, and perfume. So in other words, he's doing 2 things. He's both buttering them up and, whiskey. He's also, on the second trip, he actually fired those cannons. They also bought, as a threat, but he also, they were just blanks, but they were, but he also bought like a locomotive, brought a locomotive that was like 1/3 size or something, right? 1/3 or 1/6. And he had it, laid some tracks out, and he let them kind of, ride around on this little micro train to show them what we can bring over and stuff. So anyway, Japan ended up opening up, and that's where, Japan finally opened up to the world, is when they sent somebody so sophisticated as Commodore Matthew Perry. You got to see his books, man. They're unbelievable. I wish I had them with me, but I'm in Bangkok. I had to leave them in Japan.
You got to love the
first edition.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's awesome edition, fun. But anything from that time period, the founding fathers, I mean, if you can find that, that's awesome. Here's a question for you. If you could take all the signers of the Declaration of Independence and bring them to the future, to today in the United States, would that fix anything?
If they were in our Congress?
Well, I mean, they would have to be elected in the Congress, right? They would have to be elected.
First of all, this fiat currency would be dead. The Fed would be closed down. You know what I mean?
But they would be.
The FBI and the CIA would be closed down. You know what I mean? It's like we would see a lot of stuff closed down instantly.
I beg to differ.
They'd be like, "What are you doing, man? You should be out farming." You know what I mean?
But these individuals would be seen as domestic threats, domestic terrorist threats. You know what I'm saying? I got my contention is
they wouldn't even recognize our congressmen today. They would be like, they wouldn't even let them make tea for them. You know what I mean? I mean, our congressmen today are just not that level of sophistication compared to those guys. Our founding fathers were very serious men. They were nobody to be trifled with.
But this is my contention. Yes, everything you're saying about them, I believe, is accurate. But it's not the men that won the war for independence, right? It was the morality of the people. So if I were, if I were to get a choice,
they were much more moral.
If I had the choice, I wouldn't transplant all the signers of the Declaration of Independence to today. I would transplant the morality of the people.
Oh, for sure.
To here, because it's not
for sure
necessarily the men. It's just
100%.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that morality. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, because how did they even write that document? That is like they're trying to fashion the most moral document that they can come up with, which was pretty intense. And it's pretty amazing what they did come up with.
So that kind of brings me
to
must have had
how do you solve this to get there, though.
Right?
I bet they had some fist fights we never heard of. Good.
No, I was saying that it brings us back to how do we solve the current state of affairs? How do we solve all these issues in the United States? And again, we all agree it's not political. You're not going to vote your way out of this. It's not going to be one president that fixes all this stuff anyways. Everything's broken. So the only way that we get out of this, the only thing that's coming is either judgment or the opposite of it, right? So that if we change the heart of the nation, get back to our founding principles, turn back to God, and you reverse that ideological and cultural subversion, it's the only way to fix this. Otherwise, we're going to be in judgment. We're going to be in judgment, and we will find ourselves locked up in some camp or some prison somewhere.
Some archipelago?
Archipelago.
Yeah, gulag, right. Yeah, listen, the Constitution, as they wrote it, clearly had in mind a moral population, an educated population. The people that are coming across the border now and all the dope smoking idiots, they can't handle it. I mean, this is too serious for them. I mean, they're not the same people that Constitution was written for. Right. It takes very serious men to uphold that and women to uphold that Constitution. And most of the people coming across the border are tribal, or that sort of thing, or even criminals that are released, prisons released in Venezuela, that sort of thing. These people have no concept of this Planet of the Apes. You know what I mean? This is just like Maslow's hierarchy. They're just gonna weak people. You get your stuff stolen from you. Period. Yeah. Killed. Raped.
We need to pull all of our kids out of public education, government subsidized education. Yep. Bring them home.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah, I mean that's what we do with our kids, and it's a huge difference.
Do you have a heart out, or are you good for like 2-3 more questions?
I know. I was just checking something back in the United States very quickly here. I look to be good to go though.
Yeah. Wow.
So while you're doing that, can I ask you, is there anybody that you see in Congress right now that you're like, that's a good one?
Maybe Massey.
I love Massey. Him and I talk on X every now and again.
Yeah. I mean, he seems serious. Is he the only one?
He might be. That's the scary thing. Out of 500 members, he's the one where you're like,
yeah,
that's terrifying. Huh. Okay, so before we go, I wanted to ask you about, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but fasting.
I just went 40 days.
I know. I was watching it.
Yeah.
So why did you do that? Why did you do that, and how do you feel?
I feel very good. Actually, I was kind of sad that it was over because I was like, I can keep going. I can definitely keep going. And then I thought, I think it would be unwise actually. And actually, it wasn't that hard. That's the weird thing. It wasn't. The hard part is like the first 3 to 5 days, right? Once you get past that and you're not afraid, you have to put your fear to sleep, or throw it out that window, because people are afraid to do it. They're like, I don't think I can do that. And just shh. You can do it. You can. I mean, if you don't have enough fat, you can't do it. I don't think you guys can do it. You guys don't have enough fat. But you can go 5 or 10 days, no problem. I think everybody in special operations should do at least 1 10-day fast. It should be like mandatory. And there's a reason why, because as you know, in SF, a lot of times you get the hungriest times I've ever spent in my life were when I was in special forces, right? Because then I had very low body fat. We're working extremely hard, you know what I mean? And you're ready to eat that dog you hear barking, you know what I mean? You'll eat the bark off the tree or the bark. I'll eat the bark off the tree or the bark on that dog, And so, but that's when you super low body fat and you're just working so hard. But if you're in garrison, and the thing is like Masako Ganaha, she's a Japanese journalist. She wanted me to take her out and do some hard stuff like Darien Gap. And so a lot of times when I'm out there doing stuff, I don't want to stop to eat because I don't have time for it. I don't want to schedule it. It'll interrupt our flow, right? Because I want to get in the jungle, do our stuff, and do our things, right? And if we have to stop to eat, it messes everything up. Because I want to click, click, click. Yep. So I went with her for 4 days, no food, and she did fine. I was like, okay, I'll take her, right? And so she did completely fine. Because then anytime we miss meals and can't get it, hey, we're just not going to eat today, or bring something if you want, but we're not stopping anywhere, right? So she's good with it. It's great. And so if your team is like that, and especially like special operations guys, if they know, hey man, 5 days with no food, that's a joke. Unless you're working really hard, then it might not be a joke. But there's people that, if you're like carrying a rucksack up and down the mountains, it could get a little bit more serious, especially if you don't have any fat. But there's people who run marathons while they're fasting, right? Literally multiple marathons while fasting, multiple. I don't know how they do it, but but the 40 days wasn't that hard. The hardest part is like the first 3 or 4 or 5 days. But as soon as you get through that, it's like you've passed through the muck and you're smooth, right?
Did you eat today?
Oh yeah, I ate one meal. So I stopped fasting 5 days ago now, right? 4 or 5 days.
So do you
I've
modify
eaten one
your
meal a
diet
day
because you just went through that big period of fasting that you're like, okay, now I've got the advantage. I'm gonna change my diet and try to be more healthy, or do you just go back to what you're eating?
Oh yeah, I just went to OMAD, just one meal a day. Like yesterday, I stopped. The only thing that they don't do well in Thailand is steak. Everything else is like super ultra incredible food. But I love steak, so I went to the steak house, and it was another steak in Thailand. Not great, but I got a big one. So I ate it last night, and then what's that?
He said, "Or
so I ate that." Yeah. But Thailand's got like the best food in the world, man. That and Japan, it's unbelievable. And Malaysia too. And what's that?
Rice, a lot of carbs.
Oh yeah, but I just wanted to go for I like steak anyway, but also I just wanted to go heavier on protein, and so I got this giant steak yesterday, and I ate half of it yesterday and half today, and and a salad and that sort of thing. But I just transitioned over to OMAD, one meal a day.
So, do you have any final thoughts or?
No, go on you, man.
So, I think that what you're doing is, I wish everyone in the media had the inquisitive mind and the determination that you have.
The drive.
Yeah, because I think maybe more people would be educated and critical thinking and aware of what is going on in their world, because what happens in the places that you go affect us here in our country. And it seems like nobody wants to, it's like a cognitive dissonance. They don't want to accept the reality of their situation. It's like the comet's coming. They're like, no, Netflix is on. I don't believe it.
Exactly.
So I just.
No, you're like, but the comet's getting bigger and bigger.
It's look,
not now.
It's bigger than the fucking moon.
Last episode.
So I've been watching you for a couple years, man, and I'm incredibly grateful that you came and talked with me. But I know you and Corey are buddies, and I can't think of two better friends And I look forward to everything that you're going to be doing, because you're I think truth is love, love is truth. If you truly love people, you tell them the truth. And I think that you're a humanist.
Actually, I like that. I'm going to adopt that. Yeah.
You don't even have to give me credit. I
love that.
So I see you as somebody who really loves people because you're telling them the truth.
Yeah, God.
Write that down. I am going to start using that.
I'm telling you, God.
Like, every once in a while you hear something, you're like,
to be a Green Beret, to get you the background and the training, so you could get out in the world and do the real work. Your calling.
So I just think that you're a phenomenal person, and if you're open to it in the future, if you want to have if I can get Corey up to Scranton and we can have a chat again, that would be awesome. If you're open to it,
Scranton, we can do a live stream, and you can go to that pool where Biden let the kids play with the hair on his legs.
The interest. So if you ever get a chance to come to Scranton and ask the people of Scranton about him, the opinion is not too high. They're like, he never really lived here.
I'll bet.
He was only here for like 3 years.
Is that where Corn Pop's from?
None of us have ever met Corn Pop. We have no idea who he is. My buddy's a big Trump supporter, and I got him for his birthday. I got him a Corn Pop T-shirt, and I put it in a box of Corn Pops and wrapped it he thought it was funny because the guy doesn't exist. So
you can't make up this stuff, man.
No, it's a TV show. We're all in a TV show. Like, and we're just we need to become the authors of our own story and not let them tell us who the characters we are playing are.
Yeah, actually, sometimes that's a good way to explain it to some of the young people. It's like, if you want to be something serious, start playing that role. You know what I mean? And just play that role, and you will actually start to become that thing if you just play that role.
Manifest. I'm grateful.
That's right. Manifest it, as they would say in India.
Yeah. So I'm grateful for you giving us the time, man. I want you to please be safe. And I know you will be, but I want you to, I just want to reaffirm that.
I really appreciate it. And I love to come back on again. Yeah.
We'll get Marky down to Panama. We'll get him down there and he can.
Oh, yeah. I'm going back soon.
Dude, as long as I'm kind of a coward, so as long as somebody's got my back, I'm there.
You'll be safe. I mean, nobody's gotten hurt with me. It's funny, when I took the congressman down, I hired somebody. I was like, you keep your eye on them. So, like, they never leave your sight. And if they do, you blow this whistle because I'm coming and running. I'm not going to lose I've never lost anybody. Nobody's ever gotten hurt with me. Nobody's even gotten malaria, man. I'm so cautious of mosquitoes and everything else. You'll be fine if you're with me.
Well, you want to say something?
No, I was just saying nobody's gotten hurt except their feelings, right?
Feelings have gotten hurt.
Michael Yon, thank you so much for spending some time with us while we're on vacation.
Thank y'all, gentlemen.
Thanks, brother. Dio Presley Bear.